Good evening and welcome to Voters Decide, the Hispanic Vote 2024. I'm Eliott Rodriguez from CBS News Miami, and tonight I'm at Florida International University for this town hall, which we have been working on very hard with our news partners at the Miami Herald, El Nuevo Herald, Univision 23, and South Florida's WLRN. We're excited about this event, and we have some people here gathered at Florida International University who are very eager to delve into the issues focusing on the Hispanic vote in this election year. I'd like to start out by introducing our distinguished panelists. We have 5 panelists who are going to help me out here. First, starting with former GOP congressional candidate Irina Vilariño. She is a businesswoman. Her family owns the Las Vegas Cuban cuisine restaurants and employ some 300 people, close to that amount. We have Democratic strategist Jose Parra. He is a partner with global strategic communications advisory firm FGS Global. Jose has served as senior advisor to former Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Political science professor Eduardo Gamarra from FIU is here. He's done extensive polling of Hispanic voters in the United States. Radio host Ninosca Perez Castellón. She is the host of Ninosca en La Poderosa and is a longtime voice of Cuban exiles in South Florida. Finally joining us, Democratic pollster Fernand Amandi. He is managing partner of Bendixson and Amandi, a Miami-based public opinion research and strategic communications consulting firm. Now here's a look at the strength and importance of the Hispanic vote as we get started here going into the election. At a national level, the Pew Research Center says that Hispanic voters represent 50% of the total growth in eligible voters between 2020 and now. Hispanic voters are projected to account for 14.7% of all eligible voters in November, which is a new high. And in Florida, 22% of eligible voters are Hispanic. And we're going to start our conversation talking about the southern border, which is an issue that many point to as the most important issue facing the country right now. It isn't in the survey that FIU did with Hispanics, but it is something that's very concerning to Hispanics, so that's where I want to start out. FIU's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy conducted a Hispanic public opinion survey asking this question: what is the principal threat to the national security of the United States? While the majority, 17% surveyed, said they don't know, the second largest percentage of people, 11.5%, said it's an open border and immigrants not being vetted. So with that in mind, let me ask the first question, and I would like to ask this question to Professor Gamarra. The FIU survey found that the #1 issue for Hispanics this election cycle is inflation and the economy. No big surprise there, right? But when asked what is the biggest national security threat facing the country, Hispanics in this survey said it's the southern border and immigration. That, I must say, I found a bit surprising, being the son of immigrants who came to this country seeking a better life in the United States, because many of the respondents are themselves people who came across the border. How do you explain this fear immigrants have of fellow immigrants? Professor?
It's a very interesting question, and one that we've really grappled with, because one would assume, right, that that immigrants would be really in favor of bringing their relatives and so on and so forth. But what we're explaining it from the perspective of kind of a sociological concept, right? We're calling it the latter approach to, and it's somewhat along the following lines, that there's this perception among those who are here that the boat is full, and will the last person please pull up the ladder, right? And what we're finding increasingly, both in polls and in other more qualitative kinds of studies, is this deep distinction between those who are here and who have been here for a while and those who are arriving. And it isn't a new phenomenon. For example, we found it during the Mariel boat lift. I worked during the Mariel boat lift with Marielitos, and we found it in terms of trying to relocate Marielitos into Miami. And there was this enormous rejection of Marielitos because they had come with this enormous stigma from Cuba, and they were re-stigmatized when they came here. That's what's happening in the United States today. And so we find, a phenomena like a president, a former president, coming to the most Hispanic city in the United States and essentially announcing the massive deportation of undocumented aliens. He called them something else, but the whole issue is that that was a very well-received idea. Many of the people in the audience were probably Marielitos, were probably at some point in their lives, at least when they came across the border, undocumented.
Okay, well, I was here as a journalist covering the Mariel boat lift. It's been a long time, but we have somebody here who actually came to this country on the Mariel boat lift. And Irina, your family is the quintessential American success story, right? You came here on the Mariel boat lift, started a successful business, and you lived the American dream, right? How is it that maybe some of our fellow Hispanic immigrants and voters who came that way don't feel the same way about new immigrants crossing the border, seeking a better life and opportunities in this country?
With all due respect, I'd like to refute the professor's latter approach. The problem, I am a Marielita, I'm a proud Marielita. The problem with the Mariel boat lift was that Cubans had the most successful exile ever in the history of the United States as far as production and assimilation into American economy and society. Fidel Castro astutely imported or inserted over 10,000 common criminals into that exile in order to tarnish our name. So it's not that the traditional exile community stigmatized us for not being great people. It's simply that he literally put awful human beings into these boats to arrive to the United States and tarnish our good name. And I also refute the idea because I think that Hispanics, and I speak from my Cuban community personally, we left Cuba, but we never forgotten Cuba. And we have never forgotten our family members in Cuba. And every time that we've had the possibility of bringing them legally to this country, we have done so. Simply, we had the opportunity to come to this country, and I think it behooves us to conserve this country. None of us on this panel or on this, in this room sleep with our doors open. None of us do. We all protect our homes. And by nature, the country is an extension of our home, and it must be protected. The same as when we jump on a plane, we get patted down. Everybody wants to make sure that we're going to fly with respectable human beings. We want good people to come to the United States. I am not against immigration. On the contrary, we need great immigration. We need great immigration for our businesses, for our economy, and to give others that don't have a great country politically or a stable country to come to this country and live a better life.
Okay, let me ask Jose Parra. Do you see a contradiction here where you have Hispanics who maybe came in a way where folks weren't vetted and now saying, oh no, we can't allow people who aren't vetted coming into the country?
There's definitely a contradiction, but I do agree with Dr. Gamarra that there's this syndrome of let's pull the ladder behind us. However, I'd like to point out to a Pew study that, now that you talked about the Pew study, the Pew Center, that came out last week, I believe, that showed that on immigration, Hispanics nationally, I haven't seen the surveys specifically on Florida, but nationally have a much more nuanced view of immigration. While 75% do feel that there's a crisis at the southern border, when you look at enforcement-only proposals, they tend to disagree less with that. Only a third of Hispanics agree with enforcement-only proposals compared to 55% of the population. When you ask them about other solutions, such as putting more judges at the border, putting more asylum personnel that can process the applications and get these cases through the door much faster, they agree with that. And so it's a question also of the perception that people are seeing at the border. The other problem is the perception of crime, that there has been a demonizing effect from certain quarters with these immigrants, saying that they bring crime to the country, when actually they're 60% less likely to commit a crime than native-born Americans. So all these effects, I think, have had a point to hurt the view of Hispanics with current immigrants. But I don't think it's something that it's unsurmountable when you look at it from the national level.
There is a feeling that Hispanics are being demonized, that immigrants are being demonized, and we're going to delve into more of that. But right now we have a question from Jenny Padura from Univision 23. Jenny?
Hi, Eliott. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. So let's continue talking about that, because recently the mayor of Hialeah said that the city is facing a real challenge due to the amount of migrants arriving to the city in terms of resources. So how do you guys think the crisis at the border is going to impact the Hispanic vote specifically in this election?
Ninoska, you want to take a crack at that?
Well, I think getting back to the effect of the latter, I think that as a Cuban, for us, migration has been every time that a group has come, like when the '94 crisis, they were taken to Guantanamo and then they were vetted. When there were 10,000 Cubans stranded all over the world, and I was in the foundation and we brought them in, my proudest moment was at the White House when we signed for a document that we were responsible for their care, for their health insurance, and for settling them. And what is happening now is that you see cities like New York, and veterans are protesting because they're not getting the treatment they should, or the same putting migrants in school. And people are scared. The other day I was watching the New Hampshire primary, and there's this lady saying that the reason she's not voting for Biden is the border. And I said, how many immigrants are in New Hampshire? She says, because of the fentanyl crisis and the addiction.
It's certainly an issue all over the country.
So it is an issue. But getting back to the fact that a city like Hialeah, 425,000 Cubans have crossed the border alone. In 2 years. In 8 years of Cubans arriving from Cuba right after the revolution, it was only 250,000. That gives you an idea of how difficult it is right now for any city, because with Mariel, people didn't want them here because there were a lot of crimes, because as Irina said, they were criminals that Castro had sent over. So a lot of them were sent out of the state to camps. A lot of them ended up in prison. But in the end, people were scared because there was crime.
Let me get Fernan to chime in. This is such a big issue nationwide, the southern border, and what light is this painting Hispanics in this country, immigrants?
Well, it's not a question of how it's painting Hispanics, Eliott. It's how it's painting the Republican Party, that has now definitively, before the eyes of the world, shown their cynicism on this issue of immigration. A lot of the rhetoric, some of which we've heard up on the stage, echoed by the Republican Party platform on solving the crisis at the border, doing something about immigration. There was a Senate bill that was put together in a bipartisan fashion, led by Mitch McConnell. Paul Lankford was ready to go to the president's desk and be signed to finally address this situation. And who came out and said, we're not doing this bill? Donald Trump, the Republican nominee in waiting, who said for political considerations, unwilling to give Biden the actual ability to say we've tried to address this problem, now makes it a political football.
One quick follow-up, but what about President Biden not signing executive orders that Trump had in effect when he was in office?
Many of the policies that Trump actually put into place, President Biden continued at the border. He is now looking at the option of executive orders because he was trying to have this situation litigated where it should have been litigated, in the Congress, with a legislative action to add more border security, more agents for processing, more judge, more folks to understand the process of asylum, which is the very benefit that Irina's family, Ninoska's family, and my family came through. By the way, thank the Democratic president, President Carter, that allowed you in.
I have no problem giving
Thank the Democratic President Kennedy, who let my parents and grandparents into this country. There is a way to solve this responsibly when we cool down the rhetoric and deal with it with policy, Eliott. The problem is today's extreme MAGA Republican Party refuses to.
But even before this, Congress has been reluctant to take this issue head on, has been reluctant for many years. I know you guys want to chime in, but we need to take a commercial break. Let's take a short break. When we come back, the race for the White House in 2024 looks like it'll be a repeat of 2020 with Joe Biden running against Donald Trump. What do Hispanics think of the matchup? We'll talk about that when we come back. Welcome back to Voters Decide the Hispanic Vote 2024, a town hall. I'm Eliott Rodriguez. I'm at Florida International University. We're talking about the importance of the Hispanic vote in the race for the White House in 2024. Now, FIU's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy released the results of the annual Hispanic Public Opinion Survey in December. The poll found that support for President Joe Biden has eroded by 14% from 67% in 2020 to 53% today. That's among Hispanics. While also an unpopular choice, the survey results revealed that support for former President Trump has seen a rise from 29% in 2020 to 33% today. And that leaves me wondering, what is Donald Trump doing right now to attract Hispanic voters, or are they simply moving away from Joe Biden? Our next question along these lines is from David Smiley, who's the political editor of the Miami Herald. David.
Hi. We have heard the word contradiction already tonight, and there would appear to be some contradictions in the increasing support of Hispanic voters for Donald Trump. He sought to register his trademark in Cuba in 2008. He has said immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. He has talked about ending birthright citizenship. And I would like to ask this question of Irina and Ninoshka. What does that perspective miss about what Trump is doing to increase support with Hispanic voters? And what does it misunderstand about the idea that Hispanic voters would recoil at some of those controversial positions?
Thank you, David, for your question. First of all, I'd like to make something clear. I'm not here for Donald Trump. I'm here for my daughter. My daughter, because when we got to this country, we literally came with the clothes we were wearing, Eliott, and we came a family of 7. My daughter's an only child, reared by a single mother. I work, my family and I have worked in a very difficult business where 9 out of 10 restaurants fail yearly. Donald Trump can say whatever he wants. I'm not here to represent Donald Trump. I'm here to represent the policies that have been effective for this country. Whether I agree with every word that comes out of his mouth or I don't is irrelevant. But we want policies that are practical and policies that bring stability, economic stability, political stability, social stability. We see it in schools. We see it at our border. We're seeing it around the world. The world is on fire, and this president is not cutting it.
Ninoshka?
I'll tell you one of the reasons that Trump has so much support, and it's precisely the Democratic Party that's demonizing him and the media. The 2008 question on Cuba, let me tell you what happened. In 2008, Trump wrote, and it's in the Miami Herald, one of the best articles as to why people should not invest in Cuba. He said that his partners in Europe had asked him to join in the casino magic and invest in Cuba for the future. And the reasons that he stated why he would not were the best that anybody has ever written. Because of the way workers were treated, because there were violations of human rights, and that's in the Herald and the Wall Street Journal. What happened? Everybody came out saying, oh, he wants to invest in Cuba, and it was a lie. It was a lie because we brought Trump to Miami at that time. And that's precisely exactly what he said in that article. He said it. And this is what people are tired of. You talk about rhetoric, but Obama deported more people than Trump will ever dream of doing. And when you talk about the plan to arrange the border, what's happening? 5,000 people a day. That's the solution. 5,000 people a day. What country or city can handle that?
I need to get Jose in here. Jose, are you concerned about this movement of support from Joe Biden to Donald Trump at this point by Hispanic voters?
Well, before I get there, I want to correct a couple of things. One, you mentioned the fentanyl crisis. Do you know what percent of
I mentioned what a voter said in New Hampshire.
Well,
what a voter said in New Hampshire.
Yeah, but that implies that immigrants are bringing fentanyl into the country.
And they're not?
86%
where does
were Americans, native-born Americans who brought it. 0.02%. were immigrants.
Well, the border is open and fentanyl
Well,
is coming in.
and number two, you're complaining about the people coming into this country. Well, the economy has been powered and has been doing well thanks to the
Really?
immigration coming in.
Oh, obviously
They
you don't
added
shop for-
$1 trillion. They added $1
Let
trillion.
Let me ask Professor
You don't
Gamarra,
shop for
what are
groceries.
Hispanics saying about how they feel about the economy right now? Hispanic voters.
That's a very good question, because while in the surveys we are finding, yes, the concern is over inflation, right, and over the economy, and that's really what every American is saying. Every survey says that, and it doesn't really matter. Fernand can tell you the same. Really, any survey anywhere, it's usually the economy, right? But I think when you contrast that, and this is really I think a serious, perhaps disconnection that the Democrats have had over the last few years. In fact, there's a very good article today in The Economist. The Economist says that the U.S. has an extraordinary economy, okay? Extraordinary compared to the rest of the world. We have the lowest inflation, the highest growth rate, the lowest unemployment rate. We have really an economy that most people would love to have. There's been a tremendous disconnect, however, between what those numbers tell you and the perception among people, and largely because, as Ninoska said, and more so in Florida, Ninoska, than anywhere else, right? Because the inflation numbers for the rest of the United States are lower than they are in Florida, okay? And one of the things that you have here is what is driving high prices in Florida?
I think we have an audience question.
Absolutely. A March 5th Miami Herald article that quoted a poll done by the re-election campaign of Miami-Dade Mayor Danielle Levine Cava by EMC Research specified that Donald Trump now leads Joe Biden, or rather Joe Biden leads Donald Trump by just 11 points, or perhaps it was the other way within Miami-Dade County. Now, many of us know in this audience that voter registration mildly favors Democrats within the county. And we know that in 2016, Hillary Clinton stampeded to a nearly 30-point victory. But in 2020, whether it was in suburban neighborhoods like Kendall and Coral Gables, or areas like Doral and Hialeah, where there's really high rates of Obamacare numbers, that voter registration, that the results presidentially completely changed. Democratic votes collapsed by just 7,000, stagnated, but over 200,000 new voters turned out for Donald Trump. So within that context, this recent poll suggested that Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by 10 points among non-Cuban Hispanics and by 41 points among Cubans. So with all of your knowledge and your expertise, what rifts do you see between Cuban and non-Cuban Hispanics, and what do you think Democrats could do to combat the inroads that Republicans have made in the county presidentially and down ballot? Thank you very much.
Fernand, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. As a Democrat, it pains me to say that the gains that have been made by the Republicans are because the Democrats are absent from the playing field. They have abandoned Florida for the most part. I don't say that with glee. I don't say that with happiness. Our firm showed that in 2018, Florida and South Florida was likely to be the one area in one state resistant to the national blue wave, which we saw happen because of the lack of a Democratic engagement effort. That pattern continued in 2020. The big secret is the Biden campaign did not invest in Florida. It was really only an investment at the 11th hour by Michael Bloomberg that created any sense of a campaign. And this time around, the Biden campaign, I believe, is going to, at this point at least, not engage again in Florida unless in the summer, polling shows that the race has become closer, more competitive, and I don't necessarily blame him this time around. Biden showed and proved that he can win without the state of Florida, and this election, it is more important than Joe Biden and Donald Trump. This election is about two things. It's about whether or not this 247-year experiment in representative democracy continues, or if we go the way of an authoritarian day one dictator, which are the words not of me, but of Donald Trump. Out of the words of his own mouth 3 times, I will be a day one dictator. You better believe it.
All right, we're going to delve into that a little more. But right now we're going to take another break. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the town hall, pocketbook issues like inflation and the economy are top of mind among Hispanic voters. We'll take a closer look at the role the economy will play in presidential politics. Welcome back to our town hall. I'm Eliott Rodriguez. We're at Florida International University. Our crowd is very lively tonight, and we appreciate that. Our conversation is also getting lively. Let me reintroduce our panelists, our 5 panelists joining me tonight. Our former GOP congressional candidate, Irina Vilariño. We got the Enya in there. Democratic strategist, Jose Parra. Political science professor Eduardo Gamarra from FIU, radio host Ninosca Perez Castellón, and Democratic pollster Fenan Amandi. Now, according to FIU's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy's Hispanic Public Opinion Survey, the most important problems facing the United States today are inflation and the cost of living at nearly 20%, followed by the economy and poverty at 16.6%. And that leads me to the next question. I'd like to ask Jose Parra this question. While economic indicators have been on the upswing in recent months, we cannot deny that, we had some bad news this week. The Consumer Price Index was up nearly 0.5 percentage point. That was mostly due to the cost of gas and housing. Hispanics are feeling these high prices, and many of them feel Donald Trump did a better job of handling the economy. How do you fight the perception that economic times are not as good as the White House wants people to think they are?
Well, first of all, you failed to mention that a lot of the inflation costs in this state, which has South Florida has the highest inflation in the entire country right now, are fueled in part by the housing crisis that we have here, which talks about the policy choices by Republicans who have not fixed an insurance crisis in this state. And everybody has seen their inflation, their insurance double and triple. Now, as far as how people feel about it, look, inflation in 2022 was much higher than it is right now. And we had they were forecasting a red wave that didn't happen in this country. Conflicted voters, which are voters that have mixed views about the party in the Hispanic, according to X research, decanted to the Democratic side of the ledger. If inflation was a much higher concern back in 2022, I think it's going to be a much lower concern in 2024 when people go to the voting booth. Other issues such as abortion and immigration are going to come up in the list of concerns that people are going to use to pull a lever at the moment of voting.
Fernando Amandi, how are Democrats getting the word out about these positive economic indicators, yet people don't feel it when they go to the supermarket? Everything is costing more.
Well, I mean, as you said earlier, there's no question that the world, Eliott, not just the United States, but the world post-pandemic went through a massive economic crisis. Right. And thanks to the stewardship and the responsible economic leadership of this administration, we have the best performing economy in the world, bar none. We have the highest job creation rate created under any president in 4 years at this point. We have amongst the lowest unemployment rates. But at the same time, to Jose's point, we can't just talk about inflation in certain areas like the state of Florida, where the Republican Party has had total control for 30 years, and give them a pass, while at the same time not talking about the efforts that the administration is making in good faith. Are there people that are struggling? Of course they are. Has progress been made? It is undeniable. We also had a record stock market, by the way. People's 401k programs are growing and exploding. Are we where the economy needs to be? No. That's what an economic administration is supposed to do. But we do know that the last 3 Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden, inherited economic disasters from their Republican predecessors and spent the bulk of their administrations getting the economy back on track. That's what's happening now, Eliott.
I know you're dying to chime in.
This is the classic, who are you going to believe, your eyes or me? The bottom line is this. When people go to the grocery store, they're now spending on an average $220 versus $156 4 years ago. When you go to vote, that's what people care. They don't care about your statistics. They don't care about whatever you're making up and all these numbers. It's called mumbo jumbo, and nobody cares. At the end of the night, at the end of the day, it's our pocket that's going to go vote. And my employees and the people that I come in contact every day are hurting. They can't afford housing. They can't afford to go and buy meat at the grocery store. Even McDonald's stock prices fell today because there's shrinkation and inflation. Right. At the end of the day, that's what matters. And we're tired of the lies. These guys have been in the political realm for 20, 30 years. They're political pundits, they're political operatives. But the people back at home are disenfranchised from the political class because they don't believe what they say.
I'd like them to explain if everything Republicans get blamed for, why are the numbers going down for Democrats? And as you say, we have nothing, the Democrats have done nothing to...
Well, what do you think is the reason?
The same thing that she has said, people go to the grocery store. I don't care what the Economist says. The majority of voters do not read the Economist. They go to the grocery,
right.
and they know that they cannot afford to eat out as often, and they are upset. So again, it's mumbo jumbo, and everything that you can blame the Republicans is fine, but the numbers are telling you different. Ask yourselves as Democrat, why is there so much support for Donald Trump and for the Republicans?
Professor Gamarra, what are Hispanics saying about inflation and the cost of everything?
Well, again, there's this sense, and we're in Florida, we're in Miami, right? And we have this idea we're an enclave, right? And maybe a Republican enclave. And we sort of think that we're the world. But there's a very different reality outside of Florida. Very different reality outside of Florida that I think we will see in the rest of the year. But for example, on the economy, right? Some of the things that Jose was saying. How does it affect me, a professor who makes a professor's salary, right? Where does it affect me the most? On my mortgage payment and my insurance, right? Now, is that Joe Biden's fault?
Yes, interest rate.
I don't think so.
Yes.
I have a 2.75.
With his secretary.
Pardon me?
No. Trump named the current Fed chairman.
Yeah, and he could have taken him out. He's been there for 3 years. Do something about it.
doesn't work like that.
Go right ahead.
I have a 2.75 mortgage rate. Okay.
Good for you.
But my insurance has gone up 14%. All right.
Most people can't buy. That's why they're renting.
Most people are
Most people cannot buy. Maybe you bought 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but most people today cannot buy because interest rate is 7.5%.
It's the Republicans' fault that the insurances are high. Why is there so much support, and the numbers indicate that there's much more support and more people are registering Republicans than Democrats? Why?
My job isn't to tell you whether Democrats or Republicans are better off. The reality is, and it's one that you have here, it's perception. And perception is reality in politics, right? And that's exactly what my point was, Ninoska, that the administration has had a terrible time communicating its successes.
Let me ask.
That was the point.
Let me ask Fernand. Let me ask Fernand a question. If now Florida is a solid red state, right? And we may see Miami-Dade swing red this time around, from what I'm hearing, because it's expensive to campaign by ads in Florida. So we may see that. What are the Democrats doing to counter that, and what's happening in other states that makes them feel confident, like we don't need Florida?
Well, again, I mean, I say this with great sadness and with some chagrin. They're doing nothing to counter the Republican gains. Despite their talk, and you know, I know a lot of them don't want it to be this way, there is no organized Democratic Party effort in the state of Florida. There is none in Miami-Dade County that I could see of, and there hasn't really been one, Eliott.
But what are they seeing that makes them believe, well, we don't need Florida? What are they seeing elsewhere?
At the national level, you
yes.
mean? Well, the very simple fact that on the electoral calculus, the 270 votes that is needed to win the presidency is no longer through the state of Florida for the Democrats. President Biden proved that last time. Remember also...
But the Hispanic votes in other parts of the country is important. And what are the Democrats doing to change this swing?
Local, they're national.
Right.
The polls that have
His poll is national.
Biden down
Right.
and Trump up.
This is a national poll.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing, again, and this is very important, nationally, Hispanics are Democrats. 56% say that they are Democrats.
Right.
Most Hispanics in the United States say that the party that best represents their interests is the Democratic Party. They believe that the Democratic Party best responds on issues like the economy, even. Now, when you do the Florida polling, there's a dramatic contrast.
There's a lot of national polls that have come out recently, and
then
the numbers are going down.
But Ninoska, the polls that you see, even the New York Times poll, with all due respect, right? Look at their samples. Their samples are about 100 people nationally, and they're making these bold claims nationally.
And Professor Lamar, if I could, to your question, Eliott, in states like Nevada, Arizona, where the Hispanic vote has proven decisive, we're also going to see that play out in the key battleground states. What used to be a geographically confined vote in the Hispanic vote is now a national vote. The growth of the Hispanic electorate nationally has been so large, they're now in virtually every state. And they're going to prove decisive again in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, even in Wisconsin, there are Hispanic voters, Eliott. And in these contests that are decided by less than 1 or 2 percentage points, that is where I think you see the Democratic Party correctly focusing on the Hispanic electorate. Professor Gamarra is exactly right. Nationally, in every state poll and in the national polls, Hispanics align with the Democratic Party much more so than they do with the Republicans.
It's traditionally been that way.
Traditionally, where the Republicans are doing good work, though, is in the margin. There is marginal difference in how Hispanics are performing for Republicans than they used to do historically.
All right, we mentioned the New York Times. I just got an alert from the New York Times, and the headline is Latinos shifting toward Trump land at the center of 2024 campaign. So it is an issue.
Now liberals don't believe the New York Times. I'm learning more every day.
It's an issue that goes beyond the borders of Florida. Could it be, and you and I, Ninoska, spoke recently, we talked about the concern about Joe Biden's age. Is this an issue, Professor, that came up in the survey?
Not specifically the age issue, but we did ask 2 questions. Would you like President Trump to be the candidate? And would you like Joe Biden to be the candidate? On both sides, Democratic Latinos and Latinos who are Republicans said, no, this is really an interesting disconnect. In both cases, they don't want these 2 men to be running against each other. And so here, it's interesting because they're Democrats, the majority of them, but they don't like their candidate. Right?
Now, let me ask you, because I was in Hialeah last week, and I could not help but notice, and I interviewed many Trump supporters, notably Mayor Steve Bovo, and he showed me his big sign that they're going to put on Palm Avenue because they're so excited about Donald Trump. But then at the same time, everywhere I looked, I saw Obamacare signs. And we know that the zip codes.
We're Republican, but not stupid. Come on.
The zip codes that have the most Obamacare enrollees in the entire country come from Hialeah. How do you explain that?
Ferdinand said something earlier, and he said, that thanks to Jimmy Carter, his policies, I'm in this country, and he's right. But this is no longer the Democratic Party of Jimmy Carter or JFK Jr. JFK, I'm sorry. Or even Bill Clinton, albeit his sexual scandals. This is a radicalized party of Bernie Sanders, the Sandinista, and AOC. And unfortunately, there's a woke agenda in the country that the Hispanic community is not buying. We are majority very conservative. We believe in family. We believe in family values. We believe in providing a better future for our kids, and we don't want them being indoctrinated by the woke media, by woke apps, and woke politicians that want to perturb their brains in school by instead of sending our kids to learn how to read, do math, learn history, learn science. They're pushing this agenda in order to manipulate and soil their foundation.
I can see by the look on his face that Jose Parra wants to reply, but I'm going to ask you to please hold that thought because we need to take another break. And I want to say this. The words socialist and communist evoke strong emotions in people who have left countries with those political systems in place. Next, we'll look at how the use of those words has impacted elections in the past. Welcome back to Voters Decide the Hispanic Vote 2024, a town hall. At this hour, we've been looking at the issues that are important to Hispanic voters during this hour, and we're going to continue another half hour from TV 33 to our streaming service, CBS News Miami. Now, let's talk about 2 words, socialism and communism. Rhetoric has been tossed around that all Democrats are socialists. We've been seeing where making that association has caused concerns for Hispanic voters, and where it's been used effectively to win elections left me wondering, Where was the response to those accusations? Why didn't somebody come out and clear the record? I didn't hear it in the last congressional election. So let's get a question on that issue from Sergio Bustos, Vice President of News at South Florida WLRN. Sergio.
Thanks again for the very robust debate. En bueno verlo.
That's what we're here for.
Yes, I want to go back in time a bit. In 2018 and 2020, as Eliott mentioned, Hispanic voters in Miami-Dade, particularly Cuban and Venezuelan, who fled dictatorships, echoed a very deep-rooted fear that Democrats lean socialist communist. Donald Trump capitalized on that fear. Biden and Democrats dismissed it. What do you think, and I'm open to anyone answering, what do you think, what lessons have Democrats learned about crafting a response to something, to the whole socialist communism attack, be it founded or unfounded?
Well, I think it's going to be very hard for them to say that Democrats are not socialists when you have a Bernie Sanders, when you have an Ocasio-Cortez. So I think that's the perception. And again, we go back to perception. This is the image that they have. The rest, you know, I remember a time where Democrats and Republicans worked together. It's not anymore because it's become so polarized. So I don't know what their response will be and how it's going to be crafted. But it's very hard to, every time that you see, for example, one of the candidates that was on the third in line for vice president, this woman was a member of the Venceremos Brigade in Cuba. She was a recruiter. That woman was recruiting Americans to go to Cuba and cut cane while Americans were dying in Vietnam. This is the lady that was in line for vice president. So are they socialists? Again, we go back to perception.
Maybe that lady with the Venceremos squad, maybe she was.
But she was being handpicked by Biden as one of his...
Is Obamacare socialism? Is Medicare socialism, and all the guaguitas that take the older folks, my parents among them, to their doctor's appointments?
You know why Medicare is not socialism? You know why it's not socialism? Because you contribute every day of your life as a work person. In the workforce, you contribute to that fund. This is not like Cuba that they tell you health care is free. No, you spend your whole working life contributing for that.
Okay, now, Professor,
I think it would be
Medicare socialism?
I think it would be very interesting to remind the audience that when Claude Pepper, our representative, one of the founders of Social Security, he was rebaptized as Red Pepper. Yeah. Right? Because at the very beginning, there was this perception that Social Security was a socialist agenda, right? And most of these social programs, they're social programs, right? It's the state funding programs. Now, however you want to see it, I mean, there's this idea that we are putting money in and this money is being saved for us, and that money then will, we'll get it when we retire. That's not the way it works.
But you're putting it in.
Yes, but
you're paying for your Medicare.
It's a pay-as-you-go system. It actually takes about 12 people to pay for your retirement and my retirement.
But you're paying for it. It's not being given to you free.
But the state is handling that. And so the distinction here, I think, is, how much state or how little state you have. And this idea that Donald Trump is a libertarian free marketeer is really kind of an interesting idea, because
he's more free marketeer than Joe Biden, right?
I don't know, frankly. He's anti-free trade. He's an absolute interventionist into everything from your bedroom to the regulation of the economy. Right.
Thank goodness.
That's why when you think about
Yeah, but that's a good point. When you have the government telling a woman what she can do with her body, isn't that a form of government intervention?
I think that I believe it was Ferdinand who spoke of the American experiment. One of the things that makes this country the greatest country on earth is that irrespective of your gender, your last name, your color, your height, your nationality, anything. This is a meritocracy. You come here, you can work, you can make something great of yourself. 1 month after we arrived to Cuba, my mom was already supporting her family back home. 1 month in 1980 in the middle of a recession under Jimmy Carter. That only happens in the United States of America. What happens, and you ask, is Obamacare socialist? We're becoming top heavy. The bigger the government, the more burdensome it is for the little guy to rise above his means and look for upward mobility. No longer can people open businesses as they used to. We need a strong, vibrant middle class in order to have a stable society and a stable political system, and they are wrecking it.
Jose, is the Democratic Party anti-business?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, she's complaining about small businesses, and in the last quarter, there were more people filing for small business applications than in the past. So the party that has radicalized is the party, like Professor Gamarra said, the one that's anti-trade right now, the one that's anti-immigration. I benefited from Ronald Reagan's 1986 immigration reform. The party that doesn't believe that the United States should play a role in foreign affairs, and who has a candidate who attacks NATO and encourages Putin to do whatever the hell they want with them. That's the Republican Party of today. Ronald Reagan would be rolling in his grave if he saw what Donald Trump has done to the Republican Party.
Ninochka, you know that
yet we didn't have a war under
Putin wants to
Donald Trump.
recreate the Soviet Union. He's an old world-style communist, right? How are we okay with somebody who says good things about?
Who put sanctions on Putin? Who put sanctions on Putin? Now, when you talk about what is happening, and Trump had done that before. So when you talk about, what about Biden telling the Israeli people how they're supposed to defend themselves, because he's in such a mess right now that he needs to call for a ceasefire? Are we now the party of or the country that tell other countries how they should defend themselves? Because he has a lot of protests from Palestinians. That's what's happening. The Democrats, I'm sorry, they only react, and they react attacking others. That's what people are so upset with Democrats.
But, you know, I find it very interesting, Eliott. As you know, I'm Bolivian, right? And you're Cuban, and we have people from different places here. And as a Bolivian, I tend to look at the world from what happened to Bolivia in the last 20 years. Evo Morales became president, who has a great relationship with Putin. Venezuelans, Maduro has a wonderful relationship with Putin, right? Díaz-Canel has a beautiful relationship with Putin. And who else has a beautiful relationship with Putin? Donald Trump.
Excuse
so
me,
we have,
excuse me.
you know, I think we have to see
No. Trump has, and again, I'm not here to defend Trump, but he has not come out to defend Putin. But
yes, he has. If I may, Eliott, he stood in Helsinki, Finland, right next.
Wait a minute. Somebody here said, "Who are you going to believe, me or your ears?"
No.
I'm going to believe.
This. What about when Obama? The mic was open and Medvedev said, "Give me some time." Obama said, "and I can be more flexible after elections." Tell Putin that. Who said that? Obama, not Trump.
Trump stood in Helsinki, Finland, and said, "I believe you more than I believe the CIA and my intelligence services."
Well, maybe he knew something.
You forgot that.
No. But again, I'm not here to
I heard that. I heard that with my ears.
My father was a political prisoner in Cuba, right? And he always admired some of the qualities Fidel had. Now, did he admire Fidel? Absolutely not.
Right.
But he admires some of his quality. But you cannot disregard the fact that this man led a country for 60 years and had the huge populace, and the population were enamored with his tactics. Now,
what?
Yes.
No, I don't admire that at all. There's nothing to admire about a totalitarian.
No, I am not. Listen, you're not going to school me on not admiring Fidel. You are not going to school me on not admiring Fidel.
I'm also a Cuban exile whose family had political prisoners as
Fabulous, but you're not going to school me. You're not going to turn it around on me. No, there are things that people do that whether you like them or not, they do them well. And that's simply what I'm stating.
What do you state? What about when Donald Trump said he was in love with Kim Jong-un, the communist dictator of North Korea?
Give me a break.
Love letters.
They stopped the rocket testing. They stopped the rocket testing. The proof is in the pudding. They stopped the rocket testing, and we didn't have a war in Ukraine, and we're not sending our money to Russia or to
Iran.
Ukrainians. Okay?
So, you know,
That's what
and let me tell you something else about why people are upset with Democrats. We have a dictatorship in Cuba. Putin, obviously, and Díaz-Canel are
Right.
very close. And here is the State Department and the American Embassy in Havana promoting businesses in Cuba. And there is a law in the United States as the embargo, and they're promoting it. These are the things that people, Cubans at least, look at that and say, these people are socialists.
Let me throw out a question to the panel. Any of you can take it. Do we as Hispanics like strongmen? Do we like dictators, caudillos, as they call them?
No, I think that's putting
us down. Are
us
we
down.
attracted to them?
No, I think that is putting us down. And I think I'm really sick and tired of the fact that people tend to think of Hispanics uneducated. Oh no, they listen to the radio and they go crazy. Oh no, people tell them what to do. I'm sorry, but that's racist, and we're not uneducated.
Okay, so we're starting. So we have a very lively discussion here. We're talking about the Hispanic vote. What I'm gathering here is that on a national level, Democrats are saying we don't need Florida. Joe Biden didn't need Florida in 2020, doesn't need Florida in 2024. Florida is a red state, folks, and there is a possibility that Miami-Dade County could go red this year, and I've been around for a long time, and I don't remember that happening in a presidential election in a while, but we're going to talk more about that. Let me reintroduce our panelists, our 5 panelists. Our former Republican congressional candidate, Irina Vilariño, Democratic strategist, Jose Parra, political science professor, Eduardo Gamarra from FIU, radio host, Inosca Perez Castellón, and Democratic poster, Fernand Amandi. We also have several journalists joining us this evening, and we have Jenny Padura from Univision 23. We have David Smiley, the political editor of the Miami Herald. Go ahead, David.
As we stand today, abortion may or may not be on the ballot in Florida. How does that influence Hispanic voters in Miami-Dade County and Florida, if at all?
Well, look, I think this is an issue that Hispanics have shown that they're very interested in, and at least according to the polling I've done, both in Miami-Dade and in Florida, Hispanics, despite their personal reservations that they may have about whether or not they personally want to engage in the procedure or not, they do not feel that the government should dictate that decision. That's why overwhelmingly Hispanics are in favor of restoring Roe versus Wade. They're in favor of this constitutional amendment. I think if it's on the ballot, I think it will pass. I think it will pass overwhelmingly, and I think it'll pass with a majority support of Hispanics, both in Miami-Dade and Hispanics across the state.
Professor, what did the survey find as far as how Hispanics feel about the abortion issue?
Pretty much what Fernand has said, but I think there's an important caveat that needs to be mentioned. We were very concerned about misinformation or disinformation. In other words, purposive information aimed at changing a particular point of view. And what we found, for example, is we asked the question, what percentage of abortions are conducted after 12 weeks? Because a lot of the messaging, particularly from one side of the political spectrum, has been that you can abort until the time of birth, right? Yet, when we asked Hispanics this nationwide, right, very few knew that only 1% of abortions actually happen after 12 weeks. And so when you have this overwhelming messaging that you can abort until the day in which the child is supposed to be born, that creates a different dynamic, right? And that's where I think, many of the things that we're trying to get our grip around is how disinformation affects the way in which Hispanics vote.
Let me say something. People not necessarily know that poll or those results, but they're looking at Democrats protesting all over, saying that they want to be able to have an abortion until the 9th month. And that's what stays on their mind. When you see people protesting, they don't want anybody to tell them when they can have the abortion. And that's again, it goes back to perception. It's not about disinformation.
But is that really,
it's about that if they don't know the facts, nobody's telling them the contrary.
Is that really fair? Is that really fair that Democrats want abortion until 9 months?
I'm saying when you see a protest of women asking for abortion, saying that it's their body and they can have it up to the 9 months, Who tells them that they can't do different?
Can you name the protest?
There were
All right, we have another question, guys, from Jenny Paluda from Univision. Jenny.
And this, I would like Professor Gamarra's input. Hispanic voters have historically been less likely to turn out than other demographic groups, in part because of a significant portion is younger than eligible voters overall. What do you think is going to motivate them to vote this November?
Motivate young voters.
Young voters.
Right.
Boy, that's a really tough question to answer because one of the things that we find, and you know, at the university, for example, students are, you think that they're motivated. They register to vote, but then when election time comes, we don't see that turnout that we'd like to see. And this is sort of happening nationally. But I think there are issues, and Fernand, correct me if I'm wrong, there are issues that tend to mobilize younger voters more. Abortion may be one of them, right? And we know from 2022 that there was a larger turnout in certain areas, in areas where abortion was on the ballot, where younger people tended to turn out more. So how do we motivate young voters? That's your question.
Well, historically, Professor, young people are just very unreliable voters.
Exactly.
Right? You think they're going to show up to vote, and they find a million excuses why they didn't show up. How are the Democrats reaching out to those young voters, and what are you seeing about what are you hearing from young Hispanics, Jose?
I think young Hispanics, like Professor Gamarra said, are going to turn out because of issues like abortion. If the Biden campaign communicates his message well, they will know that he was canceling student debt for college students, which is very overwhelmingly popular, not just among young people, but among Hispanics in general, upwards of 70%. So as long as they communicate all those accomplishments for young people, I think it will motivate them. And abortion is going to be not just hopefully here on the ballot, not just here in Florida, but it's going to be in Arizona and possibly in 8 other states as well, 7 other states. And when you see issues like the Alabama Supreme Court declaring that embryos are children, you know, the issue becomes nationalized, and it affects, you know, what young people do and what young people think at the moment of turning out. Okay. And frankly, I think Donald Trump is going to be a motivator for young people to turn out.
We have a question from our audience.
Yeah, hi, Kirk Nielsen, journalist, student of AM Talk Radio in Miami. My question is for the panel, and I'm especially interested in hearing Ninoska respond to this, is with regard to the idea that the 2020 election was stolen. What do you think is the responsible, journalistically responsible, and ethical way to handle listeners and guests who make assertions that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, using rigged voting machines and other means, and also assertions that the 2024 election, that Democrats will also be rigging that, especially
you know, I've covered a lot of elections,
Donald Trump
and
loses.
Sometimes people are not happy with the results. We saw the Bush election, and they declared him a winner, then they decided not, and whatever. So people are always concerned about that. What I tell my audience is that the election was certified and the president is Joe Biden. But I cannot tell a caller that calls me and says, look, I've seen a lot of elections. I went to bed and Trump was winning in certain states, and the next day he lost. They can think whatever they want. I'm not there to change their mind. What I do say is that we were all a victim, the Hispanic, and you knew because you wrote a lot of articles, you were involved in this, and so were you, of disinformation. And every time that you came up with the disinformation, you attacked the Hispanic media. You did not attack any other ethnic group, and you had the same stories transferred from one paper to the next. You had reports, you were saying everything about everybody that you wanted, and in the end, we were the ones that were disinformation. You had the
I have you on tape, by the way.
no, I have you on tape too.
Spreading-
No,
spreading
I
all
have
that.
you on tape. You came out.
Anytime you want to listen to that, to use this person's information,
yes,
you talk to
came
me
out.
and I can play it for
no,
you.
No, you came out with a report and you called Univision and you called where all of the...
That's what you do when you come out with a report.
Right, and you called them
You
and you
publicize
told them
it.
that we were lying. And in the end, what happened? You had a lot of contracts with the Democratic Party and you were just a
Really?
Democratic operative. So that's what you were doing. That's politics and that is wrong. You were trying to discredit a whole community because you were doing your Democratic...
I'm racist against Hispanics.
No,
Okay, that's
no,
fresh.
but against conservatives, yes.
Oh, please.
There's-
Against people who spread
there's a-
misinformation, I
there's
do
a
have
video
problems.
on
No.
YouTube.
So what about Hunter Biden
There's
laptop? What about
there's-
Hillary's report on Russia?
There's
Please.
a video on YouTube.
And we're the ones that are the misinformation. Come on.
There's a video on YouTube, and I urge all the Democrats in this room, and there are plenty, to watch it. Joe Biden denying the results of 2016. Jimmy Carter denying the results of
denying?
2016.
Denying the results.
What do you mean denying the results?
Denying, saying that it was an illegitimate election, that he was an illegitimate president. Hillary Clinton, no
Hillary.
less than 5 times, came out. Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic leader.
But Hillary
Jerry
conceded.
Nader.
Hillary conceded to Trump
He conceded.
because I was
She
in New York.
conceded. She had to concede. She had to concede, and
But
then
Donald
she went
Trump
on
never
and kept on
conceded.
saying that it was interference, it was Russian collusion. Then we had the John
That's what
Durham
intelligence
report.
services
No,
said.
it did not. And the
they
John
did.
Durham report was a testament that it was all bogus. It was all hearsay, and they had no evidence to go on. But they, like your former boss, tell a lie 100 times and it becomes a truth. It was still a lie.
But can we all be in
The
agreement?
dossier was a lie. We had John
can't-
Lewis, Dianne Feinstein, Marcia Fudge, Hillary Clinton, Sheila whatever, Barbara Lee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Doing what?
All claiming that the election was fraud, that it was fraudulent, that there was election interference.
Because of Russian meddling.
Right, and they had no proof.
No,
But
they were
pushed
The
it.
saying that
intelligence
Trump's
community
election
did
was
prove
rigged.
that
No,
the
they
Russians
not.
did meddle in
No,
the
they
election
did
of
not. The
2016.
Durham report, which was an independent
No,
counsel,
the Durham report
that it
said that there was
was
no
false.
collusion, allegedly.
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 Yeah.
But Hillary
between them.
sold the
But
idea
that
of
the
that
Russians
collusion.
interfered
Can
with the
we-
election, they did.
Can't we
Yeah.
all be in agreement that misinformation, disinformation,
100%.
conspiracy theories, whether it comes from the left or from the right,
Very
is
damaging.
dangerous?
And damaging, yes.
It's dangerous.
I agree.
But you know what
And
is
we
more
should all
dangerous?
do-
It's more dangerous when it becomes a game for a party. It
Yes.
becomes a game for the Democratic Party to cancel the conservatives and to attack them and to discredit them. That's when it becomes dangerous.
And you're saying the other side doesn't do that?
I'm not saying they might do it or they might not do it. What I'm saying is what we all had to live through after the election.
Okay, I think Professor
It was
Gamarra
one
wants to-
attack after
Yeah.
the other, and it was all the same circle.
Okay, go ahead.
Look, disinformation is a very serious problem. It's a very serious problem for our democracy and democracies everywhere. And the reality is that political actors across the political spectrum use it. But in recent times, what the evidence shows us and what the survey we did shows us, we tried to measure it, Ninoska. We measured it, for example, with vaccines, right? Right? Vaccines, and the disinformation on vaccines is enormous. And what we found out...
I've seen it, by the way.
And what we found, for example, is that, when you ask the question, are vaccines effective to prevent hospitalization, disease, and so on, 70% of Hispanics across the nation agree with that. But 30% don't, right?
Because maybe
And
when you
then-
get a vaccine, you're not supposed to get the disease.
Well, excuse me, but...
That's what a vaccine is for. It's
excuse
to
me.
inoculate
But-
you.
but-
It's
but-
to inoculate
but-
you against
but what
Isn't
I-
that in every poll that you take, isn't there a certain amount of people
No,
that think
yes,
differently?
correct. But what I'm trying to tell you is that there is a group,
I mean,
a
it's
very
people.
active group, which is essentially denying that vaccines are good. And we're talking about, we didn't say COVID, we said vaccines in general.
You're alluding
And so-
to COVID.
No, I'm
You
not.
were.
We're saying...
We
No,
all get
but
vaccinated.
again,
My
it's
daughter
like
was
we happen to
vaccinated.
have a measles
We have the
infection
danger of a
this year,
measles
right?
outbreak right now
Yeah.
because some parents don't
Because
want to
of
vaccinate
illegal
their kids.
immigration, primarily. They're bringing it
No,
through the... Yes, they have.
no.
Yes, they have.
We have it in a school in Broward County where they had, what, 5, I think, measles cases.
And you have the Surgeon General of the state of Florida discouraging parents from getting their kids vaccinated to have a measles outbreak that hasn't happened over 100 years.
And by the way, Eliott, you know, if illegal immigrants are bringing it in, let me just say something about Latin America eradicated measles. All right? And so if they're coming here, they're already vaccinated.
All right, Sergio Bustos has a
I'm
question.
sure they got the vaccination.
Again, a very
Amongst
robust debate.
education and other things.
You know, the Hispanic vote, and I don't want to rain on the parade here, but in every election I've covered going back to the late 1980s.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, talking to the mic.
Okay, I'm sorry. Again, I don't want to rain on the Hispanic vote parade, but the Hispanic vote in every election I've covered going back to the late 1980s is touted as crucial, important, you know. Yet, like most U.S. voters, most Hispanic voters watch elections from the sidelines because the presidential election really comes down to a handful of swing states. Florida used to be one of those. This year's presidential race is being decided in 6 states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada. Again, Florida's not on the list. My question to all of you is Florida off the table because it's now viewed as Republican? And do you expect the major presidential candidates, and I'm talking both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the presumptive nominees, to even pay attention to Florida Hispanics?
We've heard from Fernanda. We heard from you already on this. Anybody else want to? Why are Democrats just throwing their arms up in the air and saying Florida is not at play?
Well, there definitely has been an abandonment. It occurred in 2022. We saw an investment of only 2% by Democrats compared to 2018 and into the elections here, and you get what you pay for, and that's what happened here. And we had an issue where we saw it wasn't DeSantis turning the state red, it was that people stayed home. We had 35% turnout among Hispanics. Only 13% of the electorate was Hispanic in 2022. So people simply stayed home. It's not that he convinced them to. Now, I've heard from people close to the campaign that Florida will be a priority. I also see in Miami-Dade County, we still have an 80,000 voter edge, and abortion will be on the ballot. And we see Daniela Levine Cava with very good polling coming into the general. So I do think that there are factors there that will help. It might not happen this cycle, but definitely I think Democrats have the opportunity to build on what's in the ground right now.
And I think the question, Eliott, is as far as the future forecasting. If you look at the 36 statewide contests that have happened in Florida in the last 20 years in this century, Republicans have won 30 out of 36. Democrats have only won 1 statewide election in the last 12 years. So it's not a very good record, so to speak. But I think depending on the outcome now, because there's not going to be that type of engagement, I think if it is closer, then to Jose's point, you might see the Democrats re-engage. President Biden will continue to come here because this is a state where there's a lot of fundraising to be had. So we'll come back to this state to raise funds. I think Donald Trump, obviously living here, will do so as well. So the question about Florida in the future, a lot of it will be determined by based on what happens now in 2024.
But Fernand, if the Hispanics stayed home in this election, who turned Florida red?
DeSantis did not add to his margins.
But who turned Florida red?
In 2022.
Who turned Florida red?
People stayed home.
No,
somebody had to vote and turn it red. Who did?
The Republicans did turn out. Republicans did turn.
Now,
I mean,
let's
yes.
let's look at voter registration figures, and I think it's very important. There has been in the last 4 years, the Democrats have lost 980,000 voters, right? And well, it's a good question.
That's why we're here.
But the reality is that in terms of Hispanics in the state, there are still more Hispanics who are Democrats than Hispanics who are Republicans.
Well, I've seen your numbers from the survey, and many of the Hispanics are becoming independent.
Right. That's where they're going.
Off by both parties.
Right. The majority right now of registered voters in the state are NPAs, right? And among Hispanics as well. And in only 3 counties, Miami-Dade County, Polk, and Lee, are there more Hispanics who are Republicans than Hispanics who are Democrats. So again, politics is cyclical, right? And especially when we have a democracy, when we allow the opposition to win, and when there is turnover. You know, yes, Fernand, I think you're right. It's been a 30-year, 36-year thing. But I think there will be, nationally and in states, there will be
let
these
me
cycles.
let me ask you a question, because you came to this country in the Mariel boat lift, and what a wonderful success story your family is. What about the kids who are DACA kids who came as children to this country and grew up here and went to local high school and, you know, are American in every way except, you know, documentation? Why are the Republicans so against helping out the DACA kids?
It's not Republicans. It's Republicans and Democrats.
Obama created the DACA.
Right. Well, why didn't this administration pass it? He's had both.
It's got to go through
cabinets.
Congress.
Yeah. Well, he had both at one point. But let me say something.
And I think the Supreme Court ruled on it, didn't it?
Let me say something real quick, Eliott, to the previous point, if you will. You know, I think that there's a real opportunity for our country with the Hispanic voters, because you don't have lifelong Republicans and you don't have lifelong Democrats. Our representatives are going to really have to work hard and convince our Hispanic voters. And I think there's a real opportunity for our country to do better on both parties. This should not be about being a Republican or being a Democrat. It should be about doing what's right for our nation and for our future generations, irrespective of party. And I think that, to Ninoska's point, that is exactly what we have lost. And they want to put us in boxes and label us. The party of non-labeling has been doing a lot of labeling. And I think that we need to eradicate those labels and hyphenations and not vote because I'm Cuban, I'm going to vote Republican. No, because they're going to take me for granted. I am going to vote for the better candidate, irrespective of who they are.
Are the Democrats the only ones doing labeling, Jose?
I think the answer is clear on that. The whole socialism thing, I think, is.
But what about talking about the people crossing the border and
yes, and
poisoning our blood?
To the border point that the professor said, we're not just getting Latin Americans. We're getting Asians. We're getting Caribbeans. We're getting a whole host of immigrants that are not being vetted.
Don't they have the right have a shot at the American
Legally,
dream? Yes,
correctly.
if they go through the legal, if they show up at the border and they say, I'm here, I want to make a case for.
And so the person that's back at their
here.
house, the person that's back in their countries, whether they're in Ukraine or they're in another nation and they're waiting patiently for their papers to show up in order to come in a plane and come here. And listen, I didn't come in a plane. I came in a boat, and I understand the process. I am a political prisoner, or the daughter of a political prisoner.
Right.
I am a political exile. So one thing is to come to the United States when you're being persecuted for political purposes, and another thing is when you're coming for economic expediency.
That's a very
There's
interesting.
a difference.
So what if you're leaving the country that has the highest murder rate in the world and you want a better life?
Well, you know what? Vote in a Bukele.
Eliott, because I think it's a very interesting thing, because again, I worked with Marielitos, and I was one of those who was vetting Marielitos, right? And that was my very first job, as a matter of fact. Let me tell you something, that Marielitos did not come to the United States legally. They were legalized when they got here, which is the same thing that happens, what Eliott was saying. You arrive at the border, you turn yourself into an immigration authority, they give you parole or they give you a date to show up if you're claiming asylum. That gives them legal status in the United States.
But Marielitos didn't have them for years.
Because Marielitos are part of a longer process.
They did not have them for years, that's why most of them ended up in prison if they had a traffic ticket.
Most of them did not end up in jail.
Not most of them, but a lot of them ended in Atlanta prison when they had the riots. There were people there that were not criminals.
I worked in Atlanta.
They had just had a traffic ticket.
I was in Atlanta, Ninoska.
I was there too.
I interviewed many.
In the Orange Bowl, we had to have a sponsor family and live with them so we wouldn't be a burden onto a local society.
Can we all be in agreement that after the Mariel boat lift, the murder rate in Dade County went through the roof?
Yes. Certainly.
I mean, and
I'm
Cuban.
now.
I'm Cuban. I can say that because it's a fact.
But Eliott, where are the majority today of Marielitos.
They're doing wonderful.
They're
They've
doing
assimilated.
fantastic.
And where are the
Right?
criminals? They were
Right.
deported back
Where
to
are,
Cuba.
now look
They
at
were deported back to
you guys
Cuba.
might
It took a long time.
might consume this wine, this Australian wine with all the prisoners on it, right?
Yes.
All right. They were given the choice: death penalty, or you go to Australia.
They should
Right?
Guys, we're running short on
Many of
time.
us came
We
here
have
on
one
that.
last
So-
question from the audience. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Maria Laurencio, and I agree with you. I think you should vote for the person and not for the party. I am a lifelong Republican, and in 2020, I left the Republican Party. Okay? And my question for the panel is, I frequently listen to Spanish language radio stations. Do you think that this disinformation, most of it pro-Trump propaganda, being propagated on a daily basis, is clouding our judgment and influencing our community?
I mean, when you start saying things such as immigrants bring the measles, that certainly leads people to think
I said
She
they brought
doesn't
differently.
have a
diseases.
radio program.
I
She
said
doesn't have
diseases.
a radio program.
But she's in a forum where that information spreads into
What
the
forum?
public.
This
What
is,
form?
she
This
lives
forum.
in a
And I have
free
the right to my opinion,
country.
as do
She
you.
lives
That's
in
And
a
you're
free
not-
not an
country.
opinion. You don't have the facts behind it.
No, and you worked for Harry Reid, who spread numerous lies, and they sold it, and he himself admitted that if he would say it 100 times, it became true. So you're not going to school me on facts.
Oh,
No.
please.
Oh,
No,
please.
no, and now you listen to the
Oh,
radio.
please.
You know what? It's like
Your
all of
fake
a sudden
outrage is
in this
astounding.
community,
Give me
nowhere
a
else in the world, there was a reporter for Hispanic disinformation, conservative Hispanic disinformation. Because I say something on the radio, does that mean that it's going to radicalize some grandmother like that reporter was saying?
Well, you forgot January 6th.
Please,
forgot January
you
6th.
are labeling us as
You
stupid.
forgot January
Hispanics are
6th.
stupid because they
A
get
lot of
confused.
people showed
you
up
are
at the
labeling
Capitol on
Hispanic-
January 6th
No.
because of the lies that they heard that the election had been
No,
stolen.
they went there
Please.
because they wanted to go there. Nobody told them to go there. Nobody told them to go there.
That Trump stole the election as well. Listen,
I don't know
we
about
have-
radicalizing, but I will say that you do have an important voice in this community, and you've had it for a
Yes.
long time.
And I have been a responsible person for ages in this community with a microphone in my hand. But to label this community that because they listen to the radio, they're stupid and they get convinced of what they have to say, it's racism. That's what it is.
Do we not
All
have?
right, guys.
Do we have?
We got to wrap. I'm told we got to wrap up. We're out of time. Okay, let me thank
MSNBC.
our panelists who still want to keep going, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Irina Vilariño, Jose Parra, Eduardo Gamarra, Ninosca Perez, Fernanda Mandi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To my journalist colleagues, Jenny Padura from Univision, David Smiley from the Miami Herald, Sergio Bustos from WLRN, thank you very much. And to our viewers, thank you very much. I'll see you on CBS News Miami. Good night.